Can you hear us?
I don't know.
You should be able to
Okay.
sign out.
Well, we're doing programming today. So after like the last two that I did, I don't know if you guys did one last week or not, but it's kind of takes all the energy system stuff and the training variable stuff and combines it into an actual program structure. So we'll kind of not a lot of it's going to be reviewed. It's just kind of you're going to see a lot of the same stuff from before in terms of terms, but applied differently. So just kind of touching on it again real quick, like the main training goals: strength, hypertrophy, power, in no particular order. Strength is just max force production. Hypertrophy is bigger muscles, and power is more about producing force quickly rather than like maximal force. So power is force times velocity. So there's like an optimal level of how much weight you want and the speed at which you can move it. So technically, like peak power on this graph is going to be like right around in here. So it's about like somewhere around like 40% up to 60% of maximal force. And then that's going to be the power. So like if you're trying to train power and you're using like strength percentages, 85%, you're not training power optimally. We kind of touched on that a little bit. So you want it to be something that you can move quickly, but with some weight to it. And then in terms of like organizing those into a plan long term, there's a bunch of different kind of pyramids and triangles that show the step by step. In general, it's basically like stability, mobility, endurance first. Then once you've developed that, then you go into more muscular development, so muscle hypertrophy, getting bigger muscles, and then you go into strength, and then at the very top of it all is power, and then even above that you could put in like, do I have it here? No, there's one where even above that is like sport. So if like you're an athlete and you want to be here, a lot of people, especially nowadays with Instagram, everything's supposed to be sport specific. And so if it looks like the sport you're doing and that's the way you're doing it, they think that's always the best. But no, you want to work your way up to that. That's the last thing. So if you don't have good endurance, like we said last time, like the aerobic base we were talking about is like the foundation for strength later. So if you're weak in these, this is not going to be, this stuff up the top is not going to be as effective as it could be. Yeah, you'll still get something out of it, but you want to rotate and work your way through these. So that's going to be the theme of what we're talking about today, is how to properly structure these, how to properly progress through them, and then maybe at the end actually get into a little bit of building out a spreadsheet. This here, I touched on earlier, this is called the force velocity continuum or curve. So basically, there's an inverse relationship between force and speed. So the heavier something is, the slower you can move it. The lighter something is, the faster you can move it. So this is more for like athletes too. So like, there'll be stages where we're working more here closer to season where it's lighter weights, faster movements. This is the more sport specific side. And this is more like the off season stuff where you're trying to get stronger, things like that. Okay. So that's that one. Touching on those again real quick, like we had that graph, this is that same graph from last time where like in the early stages, it's all neural and then muscle hypertrophy kicks in and then strength kind of takes over. So that kind of goes back to the idea of you want to start with endurance, work capacity, muscle building, because then that sets the stage and foundation for strength. And then just to remind us of the primary adaptations, like strength is mostly like motor unit recruitment, their firing rates, their coordination, and the ability to just activate more muscle fibers. Hypertrophy, the three main ways, and we'll touch on a little bit later, the three only ways to cause muscles to grow is through mechanical tension or just the weight, metabolic stress, and then the micro trauma or the tears that are caused from the workouts you're doing. And then, like we talked about, based on the type of exercise you're doing, those are going to be the fibers you're going to target, and then therefore the ones you want to grow. So again, like this goes back to the warm-up idea. If you're trying to grow and develop those type 2 fibers for strength and power, you want to warm up properly as well. In the longer term thing, you want to go through endurance first so those type 1 fibers are more conditioned to help support the type 2s. And then last one, power, combination of speed or velocity. So it's like the rate of force development. How quickly can you move a bar if you're doing a squat? And it incorporates things like the stretch shortening cycle. So that gets back into that like elastic property of muscle we talked about. And that's where you think of things like plyometrics, jumps, sprints. That's going to be more your power training. And the rate of force development is going to be more of the kind of weightlifting style, med ball slams, kettlebell swings, box squats with an emphasis on the speed, not the weight. So just to kind of go back real quick now that we have that, This is going to be more like this side, strength speed, like this is going to be more of that force focused power. And then the speed focused power is going to be kind of down here where you're doing like lighter jumps, throws, Olympic weightlifting, full sprinting, plyometrics versus heavy Olympic lifts and like squat, bench, deadlift with a focus on the speed. So that's kind of how you can apply them all and work through that. So now the training variables, this is just kind of an overview. I have them all listed out later individually in slides. So we'll see these again. But basically strength is higher intensity, greater than 85% of like your 1RM. So that goes back to there's different ways to quantify how intense something is. 85% is going to be probably more for a more experienced lifter who one knows what their 1% max is, or their 1RM, as well as for beginner lifters, it's not typically advisable to take them to 1RMs. Like you probably want to stick like a 3 to 5 RM and then just estimate their 1RM. And then it's going to be lower reps, 2 to 6, unless you're doing 1RM testing, and longer rest. So that goes back to the energy systems, the ATP we were talking about. You want that phosphagen system to be able to help you with your strength. So you want that long rest. Hypertrophy, more of a moderate intensity. So it's like the intensity below strength training, 87 or 67 to 85%. Moderate reps, 6 to 12, and moderate rest. It's just the moderate zone. So kind of occupying everywhere. And then power. Power, like I said, like it kind of, you can train power in different sides because it's force and velocity. So you can train force, which is going to be the higher end up to like 90% where you're doing like a heavy box squat for speed. And then you could do like a weighted jump with a trap bar or 2 dumbbells by your side, and that's going to be more of the speed emphasis. Low reps, just like strength, because like we talked about with that, the power is going to be focusing a lot on the phosphagen system. So if you're trying to do jumps, 12 jumps, and your focus is power, you're not really training power after that 5th rep. You're going to be training more like power endurance or just muscular endurance in general. And then as well, come back to the energy systems. We want long rest for this. It's very close to strength, if not even longer. So this is kind of the overview. And then you can see this is another key thing too. Even though these are the relative recommendations, you're still going to get a little bit of everything no matter what you're doing. So that's kind of what this shows here. It's the zones. Like you're still going to be getting, even though the main focus at lower reps is strength, you're still going to get muscle growth out of that. You're still going to get maybe a little bit of endurance out of that. But the primary thing you're working on is strength. Same thing with hypertrophy, and then same thing with endurance out here. And then again, you could put /power right there. So those are the main training variables. Any questions so far? Good. Okay. Chat. Any questions from the chat?
Any questions from the chat?
No.
Okay. All right. So this one's a lot of words, so I'm gonna read it for all the viewers. It was just I just didn't want a bunch of slides, so I just put it in. So basically, there's 4 main principles when designing a program. Okay, so those are both specificity or individualization. Who are you writing it for? What do they want to do? Then overload, which is basically like the training stress, and it's closely related to progression, hence the term progressive overload. So it's just how you're progressing, the stress you're putting on them, and then the variation you're applying. Those are the main 3. So that's the easiest way to think about all these big words, okay? And I'll leave it up for a little bit if you're taking notes, but we'll go through them again. So specificity, individualization is basically the overall program or workout with a specific goal for the client. That's the general idea. And it's accomplished by targeting whether it be muscle groups. I want bigger legs. I want bigger arms. Energy systems. I'm very bad at running long distances. I need more aerobic. Or I'm very good long distance, but my sprints are terrible. I need more anaerobic. Speed of movement. That goes to kind of the power idea, working on the speed on the bar or the speed at which you can run. And then movement patterns. So movement patterns, I didn't write this one out, but there's basically a general set of movement patterns. You can think of it as squat, hinge, push or lunge, single leg, push, pull, and then carrier core. So like those are the main 6. And then like if you're designing a full body workout, you basically just pick one of each of those movements and you have your workout done, those 6. So squat, hinge, single leg, push, pull, carrier core. And then the last one, muscle action types. So that gets back into like eccentric or tempo training where you're working like more on the way down, the lowering phase. The concentric, which is like the speed of the movement, or like pause reps where you're holding the bottom of position. So those are the 3 muscle types or actions. Overload. So overload is the training stress, and we had that principle that we talked about last time, Fit VP. This incorporates that. So it's like frequency. How many times a week are you working out? You can overload by adding more days per week as you go. Intensity. You can add more weight on the bar as you go. Type, so you can change up the exercises or the style of the workout, circuit style, standard style, and then recovery or rest intervals. And basically the idea is you want to progress that every program or workout so that they're always getting overload and seeing adaptations as we go. Progression, last two. This is just a systematic modification of a program or workout, aka progressive overload, and then that's going to be kind of the basis of things as we go. Is another term for all of this is periodization. And once again, it's changing the intensity, the frequency, the exercise difficulty. So maybe you go from like a dumbbell clean into a kettlebell clean into a barbell clean. So that'd be another way to do it. And this is a key, is it's based on the individual progress of the client and not necessarily a preset structure. So that's like the beauty of this gym and having private trainers is we can adapt the program based on how you progress when you're working with your one-on-one clients. And then variation is just the plan, variety, and exercise. That one's pretty straightforward. So a lot of words. I think we have one more with a lot of words. I'm sorry. Kat, in terms of programming methods, when you're writing a program and you're building it out a longer term structure with planned variations, planned progressive overload, that's called periodization. And then in terms of the main ways to periodize a program, there's three main ways. There's linear periodization, undulating or nonlinear periodization, and then block periodization. This is like the foundation. There's a lot of programs out there. I don't know if you guys are familiar with a lot, but like a classic one is like Wendler's 5-3-1, where like week 1 is a 3x5, week 2 is a 3x3, week 3 is a 3x1 or a 3x5-3-1, and then you just keep repeating that. That's a form of undulating periodization. So all the programs you'll see, people when they sell their programs, they're following one of these methods. They just put their name on it because it's the way they styled and used the variables, all the things we talked about. So basically linear is, as the name suggests, it's a linear graph. As intensity goes up, volume goes down. There's an inverse relationship. So the harder things get, the less you do it. So now thinking back to those training variables, basically what it means is start with endurance, go to hypertrophy, go to strength, go to power. And then along the way, the intensity goes up, volume goes down. That's the best approach for beginners. So most beginner lifters, linear periodization is going to work, and you could just keep reusing it until their progress stops or slows. And then you're like, okay, now I need to try a new style. Then that's going to be the undulating, would probably be the next best, where this is, you kind of alter the focus of whether it be strength, power, hypertrophy, based on the day or the week. So that's where the name daily undulating periodization or weekly undulating periodization. So I have like a table that I'll show you, but to touch on it right now, like daily would be like Monday we're doing power focus, Wednesday we're doing strength focus, Friday we're doing hypertrophy focus. That's daily undulating periodization. Then weekly would be like, okay, week 1 is going to be power focus, week 2 is going to be strength focus, week 3 is going to be hypertrophy or volume focus. And this is going to be more for like your intermediate to advanced lifters or athletes with like long sports seasons. So you could think like baseball as an example, because they play almost year round. Golf is another year round sport. Volleyball is another example of a year round sport. So those are going to be sports that will probably, even if they're beginners, just because of the demands of their sport, will probably still do best with this. And then the last one, block periodization. This is where you just kind of focus on one specific quality, hypertrophy, strength, or power, for a dedicated number of weeks. It's very similar to linear. It's just a little bit more intended for advanced athletes, because the number of weeks you might be doing a lot longer than linear. Linear might be like every 4 weeks you progress. This could be up to like 8 weeks, because advanced people, it takes them longer to develop an adaptation, so they might benefit from this. But this is also like the classic style for like powerlifting. Powerlifters often use block periodization because their competitions are usually spaced out and they know exactly the number of weeks that they have. So you can be like, okay, we're going to do this number of weeks on hypertrophy, this number of weeks on strength, this number of weeks on power. So it follows closely to linear. And And then as well, like sports with longer off seasons. So like you could think now football's in football, they have like 16 weeks out of the season. So they have a very long off season, so they can follow more of a block periodization model. And then maybe during season, we'll adapt something more like this. So this is that chart. So this is the linear periodization. So basically, as the program progresses, intensity is climbing as you get up towards power and strength, while the volume or sets and reps goes down. And then this is just kind of this is an example of the undulating model where it's undulating. So it's going up and down. It's like with 1 week, you're going to do something with a lot of volume, and therefore the intensity is going to be lower. Then the next week, you're going to ramp up the intensity, cut the volume, and then keep doing that. So that's why this is going to be better for your more advanced athlete or somebody who's playing sports year round, because you're going to be like, okay, they have games this week, so we want the volume, or they have games this week, so we want high intensity, low volume. But they have an off week here, so this is a good week to pick up some volume and lower the intensity. And the purpose for that is recovery. You want to make sure their body can recover, and more importantly, they're able to perform at their best when they're trying to play their sport. And even though you see these undulations, there's still a little bit of a linear method here. So basically, this is kind of like you can think of this, whether it's a sport, this is their sport season, or like a power lifter, they have a meet here where they're going to go test their bench, squat, deadlift. So you're planning for that, and then you basically just work backwards. Count up the number of weeks and work backwards. So that's going to be the general strategy too when designing any program, is figure out what the end goal is, figure out the timeline for that end goal, and then just work backwards from there. So it's harder to start from the beginning and then get there, because you're like, well, where am I going? So you could think like, okay, I want to learn how to do a hang clean. You're not going to start them necessarily right with hang cleans. So you want to work backwards. Okay, hang clean with the barbell. Okay, kettlebell clean, dumbbell clean, and then maybe just like a dumbbell push press, just to kind of work on that. You work your way up. Okay. And this shows you, like I said, linear and block are very close. You could just think that this was the timeline. You spend like the first 4 weeks on hypertrophy, progress into strength, then do power. Versus the undulating, where like you could do day 1 power, day 2 strength, day 3 hypertrophy. And this one's actually really good, this structure for the daily, because most athletes' games are later in the week or on the weekend. So especially if they don't have games on the weekend, a lot of people are usually relaxing Saturday or Sunday, so their central nervous system is going to be fresh. So that's going to be the best time to train power earlier in the week. And then save the lower stress stuff, the higher metabolic demand, for the end of the week. So that's kind of the flow of the different models.
Ryan said, we use a version of linear periodization. It allows to regress for irregular members.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too with linear, is it comes back to beginners, because beginners either whether they just be less consistent or they're just newer to the training stress. So it's going to slowly progress where even if they miss a few days, they're able to hop right back in, and it's not going to be overwhelming, because it's like if they missed a couple days and they haven't done the volume days, and then they come in on like a power day that's super fast and explosive, heavier weights, that's going to kind of hit them a lot harder. So yeah, that's again is why linear is best for beginners. So now program design. When you're building a program, and I'll show you pictures to kind of conceptualize these words. There's 3 main sections or subdivisions. There's the biggest picture of it all, the macro cycle, the long-term plan. What's the end goal you're working for? Typically, it can span up to a year or a sports season. And then this is the big picture. You figure out their goals, you write that down, and then you work backwards. So then the next step back is going to be the mesocycle, or the training blocks. These are about 4 to 6 weeks. So this is 12 months, and then you could have up to 12 mesocycles then if you wanted to. And then you have a specific focus. So is it hypertrophy, strength, power, things like that. And then you divide up the microcycle into the weekly plan, which details kind of the day-to-day training. And then that goes back to, are you using linear, are you using undulating, are you using block? That will help dictate what the day-to-day cycle is. So in the macro cycle, I put the definitions down here because the couple pictures I have next didn't detail it. But basically, whether it's a sport and they actually have their seasons, or it's more like powerlifting where you need to prepare, then you're getting closer to your competition or your meet, and then you actually have the meet. You start with muscle size and work capacity, hypertrophy and endurance. Then you get into kind of more maximal strength, heavier weights, and speed. So you're working more on power development. And then in season, the focus is on like peak performance or power and recovery. So this is where maybe you dial back a lot on the volume, whether that just be the sets and reps you're using for one day or just cutting back on days in general. So like with a lot of the sports I work with, give you an idea, like ideally like 4 times a week here, upper lower lifts. And then here would be like 2 to 3 days a week, close, ideally 3, but some sports, they just got very demanding schedules. So you can just think 4 times a week, 3 times a week, full body, and then 2 times a week, full body. And then for like the more seasoned person or the gym enthusiast, they can get away with a 3rd day, but that's going to, again, be more of your advanced lifter. So here's the pictures showing kind of that breakdown now. Oh, that came out so blurry. Uh-oh. Well, so here's the macro cycle. Here's your plan. Here's your goal. It could be a baseball program. It could be a powerlifting program, a squat program, the Wendler 5-3-1, for example. Then you break it down into the mesocycles. Okay, this is month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4. And then you break down the months into the individual weeks, week 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you break down the weeks into the individual training days. And then that's just the general overview of how they all tie together. And based on the sport and the end goal, that's what then determines these. So if you're starting here, you're like, where do I start here? So start here, then work there, then work there, then work there. So that's where at the end, if we have some time, I'll show you how to do that on a spreadsheet, how I do that at least. So this one is more of like a sport-specific style, but same idea, mesocycle, the annual plan. Then you break up the macro cycle, Then you break up the macro cycle into phases of training. So these are like the seasons. You have like your preparation, your competition, and your transition. And then this is going to be more of the mesocycles here. So you have like a general physical preparedness, or GPP, if you've ever heard of that. Then you go into specific physical preparedness, which is SPP. Then you have like your pre-competitive, main competitive, and then your recovery after it all to let your body rest and recover. Then you break it down into, I don't know why it says macrocycles there. So this could be the mesocycle, and then you break it down into microcycles. So again, you can think this is going to be more work capacity and hypertrophy. This is going to be more like max strength and power development. Then this is going to be where the sport-specific movements start coming in. So this is where you really want to start, even if it's not a sport and they want to learn hang cleans like I keep using, this is where you really want to start getting in hang cleans. And then now they're working on the speed of the movement and the rate of force development. And then here you're just trying to maintain the progress you made there. So you can think hypertrophy, strength, power, maintain, and then recover. So then here it's going to be just kind of cycling through strength, hypertrophy, power again, whether you're using that undulating model. It could be daily, it could be weekly. And you're just trying to keep them in a state of peak performance and then significantly reducing the volume to not overwhelm them so their body can recover between games and training and still perform at its best. And then you basically take the transition block. Is a good way of thinking of it is just like recreational activity, unstructured exercise if they want to be in the gym. There's no specific plan here. Just come on in, work out if you want to, try something new. But the main thing is mental and physical recovery, because as well, trying to follow this schedule, especially for a year, by the end, you could potentially get burnt out, whether it be from the training or your sport. So having time off, not only from training, but also your sport is good, because it's going to help your body recover mentally and physically. So those are those pictures. So now we're going to kind of go into each variable in a little bit more detail. Okay, so for like endurance, this is where you're thinking of like higher reps, 12 to 15 plus. Could be time-based stuff too. So like 30-second or minute of exercises, and then you're tracking reps as you go. And you're thinking like 1 to 3 plus sets, depending on where you're at in your program or where you're at in your fitness level. Intensity is going to be very light here. So we're thinking like body weight up to 65% of the 1 RM. So you don't want to get super heavy on these. Keep it pretty light because, again, you're trying to go at a high pace. So if you're trying to keep a pace up and you're lifting very heavy, that's where like injuries come into play. And again, you're not really getting what you want and trying to focus on endurance. Tempo, there's like not necessarily a control or a concrete tempo. I would just call it more controlled, where in terms of control, you're just thinking like 1, 2, 3, down, up. And then based on the movement though, like, if you're doing like burpees or something like that, that's where you're trying to move a little bit faster. So, it's controlled. The theme of control is just range of motion and form. And that's kind of the adaptations you're looking there outside of obviously work capacity. So you want work capacity, but focus on range of motion, technique, form. And then how you design those exercises, those workouts, you can just use straight sets, which is where it's just like, okay, we're going to go through 3 sets of 15 on goblet squats, and then we'll go to the next exercise. Or you can do circuit style, where let's say you had 10 exercises, you do one set of every exercise in order, and then start the cycle all over again. And then the main focal point for this is going to be rest. That's going to be the best way to build your endurance and target endurance, is manipulate the rest intervals. So maybe week 1 is a minute of rest, 60 seconds. Week 2 is 45 seconds. Week 3 is 30 seconds. And then that'll auto-regulate the intensity and the reps they're doing. So that's the emphasis for endurance programming. So then next, you guys got all that? Okay. Hypertrophy. So this is kind of the next rep range down. 6 to 12 reps, could be anywhere from 3 to 6 sets. So obviously, the more sets you do, you're on the lower end of the rep range. The higher rep range, you're on the lower end of the set range. And then this occupies 67 to 85% of your 1RM. I think I mentioned this earlier and I didn't actually clarify it. There's a lot of ways to quantify percentage 1RM. We touched on it, where it's like you could do RPE, rate of perceived exertion. So this would be like, I want you feeling like a 6.5, like an 8.5 out of 10 effort level. Or if you did like RIR, like you want to think like maybe 2 to 3 reps left in the tank, up to 4. And then this is now where tempo is going to be a little bit more important, especially for the mechanical tension side, time under tension. The best way to create that is through slow eccentrics. Something like 3 to 5 seconds on the way down for a squat, or bench, 3 to 5 seconds down. And then since you're not trying to work on necessarily power or strength yet, just a controlled eccentric where really you're just trying to maintain that mind-muscle connection and feeling the muscle you want working. Because if you haven't developed the muscle yet or your technique and you get too concerned with moving fast, that's where your body's going to start compensating. You might see different movements you want that you don't want. Rest, it's going to be a little bit longer than endurance, but it's not going to be as long as the strength power, because that's another way to adapt and help grow muscle is the metabolic stress. So you want a little bit more rest, so because it's heavier weight, but not too long, because you want to keep that pump or that burning sensation that we talked about. That's kind of the application of rest and metabolic stress around hypertrophy training. And then the last one, this is the muscle damage. It connects closely with eccentrics, but also exploring deeper ranges of motion and getting as much stretch into the muscle to help it get those micro tears that then kickstart the building process. And then like we talked about, the keys for that is even if you put that stress on your body, you need to rest or sleep, you need to eat calories and protein. Okay. And this is going to be obviously your compound isolation movements just for volume. So you're not necessarily going super heavy. You're just working on higher sets and reps. And then again, like I said in the beginning, the 3 ways to adapt muscle in terms of hypertrophy: tension or weight, damage, that's the volume's going to be doing that, or the tempo, and then metabolic stress that connects back to the rest interval. Got it?
Got it.
I meant like for writing it down, not like understand.
Understood.
Okay. Then strength programming. So like we said in the beginning, this is going to be lower reps, 1 to 6, 2 to 6 sets. So you can think like we were talking about, like during competition, you don't need a lot of sets or a lot of volume. You're just trying to maintain your strength. So you can do like a 2x3. But earlier in the off season, in that specific stage, you're actually trying to build strength. That's maybe you're doing a 6x2. So that's kind of how you can invert and flip and still get strength, but based on your goal in the season, you just later in the season, lower volume, but same rep schemes. And then early in the season, higher volume, same rep schemes. Intensity, 85%. So you can connect that with the RPE, RIR we talked about. Most people are not going to want to be doing 100% all the time. So like realistically in that year plan, there might be like 4 weeks out of the year where you're actually taking somebody to 100% if you ever do. Otherwise, you're thinking like 85 to 95% most of the time for strength. And then the tempo is going to be just controlled eccentric now. So now, because you just don't want to drop and all that weight captures you at the bottom, you want to control it. And then this is now where you want to work on exploding out of the bottom for a squat, for example, because part of strength is as well that rate of force development or how quickly you can move the bar. And then again, you're going to want to rest longer for this because weights are heavier, reps are lower, and we want to make sure your energy systems are recovered so that you're getting the most out of your strength training and not necessarily doing like endurance. Again, this is going to be more direct towards your compound lifts. Like you're not necessarily going to do a strength focused bicep curl like that I mean, unless you wanted to, but that's since it's more of an isolation move, you want to focus more volume on that to help the muscle grow. This is purely going to be focused for your compound lifts. So squat, bench, deadlift, pull up. You can even add Olympic lifts in there too. Anything that's compound. And again, this is going to be mostly neural adaptations. So you're increasing the motor units that you're recruiting, their coordination or ability to communicate with each other, activate muscles, how quickly they fire. So this is a cool graph because it kind of shows you, based on the percentage intensity, what kind of lift best corresponds with that. So like, your maximal sprints, 100% effort, that's going to be definitely like the power side. We haven't touched on power yet, but that'll be next. But you can see here like snatch, clean, more in the middle, deadlift, RDL, good morning, presses, and then your isolated lifts like curls and tricep extensions and stuff like that. And this is technically, these aren't actually percentages of RM. This is just the percentage of the motor units involved. So that's again why if your goal is max strength, this is why like Olympic lifts are the best way to develop max strength, because they activate the most motor units. They activate the most of your body compared to even just your power lifts like bench press and deadlift and squat. There's not as much motor units involved because you're not moving as much. You can think of a power clean from the ground. It's a combination of all of these moves of the power lifts. There's the deadlift in it, picking it up off the ground. There's the squat component in terms of the catch and taking it down and back up. And then you can think there's a little bit of upper body, not so much the bench press side, but pull-ups and stuff like that. So this is a good idea, a good graph to show the importance of like, start here, build these up, because these are the foundation for these. And if your goal is strength, this is why you want to learn how to get to doing these. And then this kind of goes back to that motor unit graph, but just with the exercise like parameters in terms of sets and reps. That graph was on our last slideshow, but I just kind of put it there to help connect it all. Okay, and then the last one, power. Power programming, again, low reps, moderate sets, 3 to 5. So you could be doing like a 5x1 power clean, for example. 5 sets, 1 rep, and then you take 2 to 5 minutes of rest. This is where you're really focusing on the concentric portion, moving as fast as possible, because that's what power is. And then if it's more of like a plyo, the other way to move as fast as possible, and it's separate from moving a bar, is going to be what's called ground contact time. So like if you're jumping, like a good one is a depth drop where you step off a box straight into a vertical jump. You want to minimize the amount of time your feet are on the ground. And then that's going to help you build speed. And again, like I talked about in the beginning, there's more speed emphasis power and there's more strength emphasis power. Other terms for that is there's elastic. This refers to more of the stretch shortening cycle, plyometrics, ground contact time. And then there's going to be more explosive power, which is more of like your Olympic lifts, your med ball throws, your weighted jumps. They're more of a strength emphasis. And look, they're there. Olympic lifts, jumps, med ball throws, kettlebell sprints. Adaptations, rate of force development, RFD, and amortization is a fancy phrase for the transition point between going down and going back up. Amortization. Yep. So that's the stretch shortening cycle. So you stretch the muscle, shorten the muscle. The amortization is that period right there. We're going from the eccentric part back to the concentric part. So this graph shows that peak power in the middle, like I talked about, and then you have like your explosive strength, elastic strength, max strength, and max speed. So this is going to be more like your max effort sprints, resisted sprints. This is going to be more plyometrics, weighted jumps, Olympic lifts, and then power lifts. And then this graph shows kind of the amortization concept. So basically this is just talking about as you stretch a muscle or it increases its tension, and as it lengthens, there's an elastic property within the muscle that contributes to the ability to produce force. So that's why you want to focus on getting out of that bottom position on a squat, for example, into moving up as quickly as you can, because that's going to incorporate the passive tension or the elastic property of muscle and lead to a greater overall force production. Okay. Got all that note-wise? Okay.
Wow. Wow.
Oh. I just added quick coaching cues. I've said a lot of these, but hypertrophy, again, is just time under tension. So this is where you're just trying to really tell your clients, like, keep it slow. You're not trying to rush the movement. We want to focus on the eccentric. want to focus on feeling the muscle you're trying to work on, that mind-muscle connection. And then again, the technique, so you're not compensating and using muscles you don't want to use. Strength is going to be like body tension or core bracing. They're kind of closely related. So this is why you want to build work capacity and your core, and that core is going to contribute here. Because again, with strength at heavier weights, this is less about compensating, because if you've already developed the technique, you shouldn't be compensating. It's more about an injury thing. So you can think if you lose your brace at the bottom of a squat and then you get, or like a deadlift in your back rounds, more injury. Another one is bar path. That refers to like efficiency. But again, if you've developed the technique, that should be there. It's more of like a reminder. So like with a squat, bar path basically just means is you want that bar moving as straight up and down as possible. So if you see like a lot of forward lean, their technique's there, and that's why strength, they're not ready for strength yet. Maximal strength, they're probably gonna get hurt. Bench press is an interesting one, because bench isn't straight down. It's a little bit of like a J shape where it kind of comes down and back like that. So that's the bar path. You want to see that bar path, but you can think of it like a push-up too. You're doing a push-up straight down, you're here. Your chest comes forward or your shoulders come forward, and then you come back. So that's just a concept around bar path. And then again, the controlled descent. You don't want to just drop because you're trying to get that stretch to get that shortening part. And then power, this is all about intent. So especially with a lot of like my youth athletes, like a good example is with like med ball slams. I'll have some clients that'll just pick up the med ball and then just kind of drop it. And I'm like, we're not doing med ball drops, we're doing med ball slams. So this is really where someone's like, oh, that was super easy, and they're not tired. It's they need to work on intent, move as quickly as you can, as hard as you can, as explosively as you can. And with precision. But again, that's why everything builds up to this. So if you don't have good technique, you don't have good work capacity, endurance, or strength, this is not going to be beneficial for you as it could be. Like you're still going to get something out of it, but probably just sweat. That's probably it. Okay. So now just kind of touching on some recovery. This is another example of like periodization here in a second. We'll touch on that. Basically, strength is very high on central nervous system fatigue. So this is where, you want to give your body at least 48 to 72 hours before like your next big heavy lift. So that's why I was saying like, if you did like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you can make Monday like bench focused, squat focused, and a deadlift focused, something like that. Another way to think about it is like muscle groups. So you can do like upper body, and then that's why it's like upper body, lower body, day off, upper body, because by then you've gone through lower body, you've had a day off, so you're at 48 to 72 hours before you touch the upper body again. So that way you're always going to get the strength out of that. And that connects to this picture, the high-low model. So this is like a good athlete kind of style, where this is going to be like strength-focused day. This is going to be more like hypertrophy-focused. This might be a power-focused day or strength, back to hypertrophy or mobility. And then you just kind of keep doing that. So then this is that undulating, where it's high stress, low volume, high volume, low stress, so their central nervous system recover. So when you get back to this day, they're getting the most out of that day. Because if you just had high day, by that third day, their nervous system's going to be fatigued, and they're not going to get what they want out of it. And then hypertrophy is more going to be high on the muscle damage side. So that's where muscle soreness comes in. And why you're focused to help mitigate that is going to be calories, protein, and sleep. I wrote the recommendations in. So in terms of pounds, 0.8 to 1 grams per pound is sufficient there. Sleep 7+ hours ideally. I know it's not always possible, but that's the ideal. Calories there's not a good specific range like this, because it's very specific to, well, what's your height, what's your weight, what's your age, what's your sport, what's your workload, all of those. So that one's when you kind of program and work with the client a little bit more individually on. And then power, less muscle damage than hypertrophy, but similar to strength, needs the fresh nervous system. So that's why I was saying in the beginning, power, if you had like an undulating plan, power would go best on like Monday or day one. And then you do hypertrophy or mobility conditioning style day. And then you do like upper body strength, and then another hypertrophy mobility day, and then lower body strength. So then that way you're getting 2 strength days, 1 power focus day, and then they're all kind of spread apart. So that way you're getting the best out of everything all the time. And then another way to do it though is also earlier in the workout. So it could be earlier in the training week or earlier in the workout for that day. Okay.
Question.
Oh, question.
Aside from nutrition, how do we communicate the type of programming we do need to contribute to their goals, health/weight loss?
So is he looking, are they looking for an answer about like what is the best program for each of those goals, or is it more just about how do you communicate that to them?
I think it's a little bit of both.
A little bit of both?
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of communicating, like this is kind of one of the part of my sales pitch with the client is on the private training side is like, I'll tell them I'm not doing like, I don't do cookie cutter programs. Like I sit down with you, we do an evaluation, we figure out your goals and your timeline that you want to see those goals. And then I'm going to build a program specifically for you that's designed to get you to that goal and the timeline you want to see it. And then along the way, I'll be able to, based on how you're progressing and how you're sleeping, how you're eating, how weight loss is going, that's where then you're like, okay, well, we didn't see the weight loss we wanted over the last week, so we're going to increase the workload a little bit or calories out, or we're going to go down a little bit more in our deficit for calories in if the goal is, say, for example, weight loss. Let's say the goal's power or they're an athlete and you're noticing after a month or two, they're really having a hard time recovering. It's like, okay, there's either too much volume or too much intensity. We need to scale back a little bit. Or I can talk with them and be like, okay, well, what are you doing outside the gym? And they're like, well, I'm up all night playing video games. I drink 5 Red Bulls a day. Like that's where you're like, okay, we need to work on stuff outside of the program or the workouts themselves. And then in terms of each program, again, like it kind of depends on their fitness level. Like for a beginner, linear is going to be best. For more advanced, undulating is going to be better, or just more rigorous schedules. Undulating might be a little bit better in terms of scheduling like sports seasons, not necessarily like somebody's less consistent. They'll still be better with a linear. So I don't know if that's like the best answer for that question, but because there's just a lot. There's like and the easiest answer I give is it depends.
Well,
It
what about
depends.
for class purpose?
Classes, like group classes.
Yeah.
Well, that goes back to kind of what I was talking about with like the youth is like if we had like the youth is more beginner. So they could just do a linear and no matter at what point they join, they're going to get something out of it because we can regulate it as we go. But then maybe after a couple years of that and they notice like I'm not getting as strong as I want or I've maxed my ability to hold onto a dumbbell for a goblet squat, that's when maybe, all right, well now let's have like an intermediate level that's going to be more undulating program design. And then that's how you can kind of market it in the sense of this is our beginner. It utilizes linear periodization, so you use all the buzzwords. And then our intermediate to advanced class use more undulating. This is for people who are more consistent, that are able to come because the schedule commands or demands that you're there. Because day 1, we're going to do power. Day 2, we're going to do strength. Day 3, we're going to do more hypertrophy stuff. So if you're only coming on day 3, then you're only going to get hypertrophy. So you might as well just stick with the linear beginner classes.
Got it.
So that's kind of how I would answer that.
Got it.
So now I have some sample training blocks. So this kind of just takes all based on the goal, the sets and reps, progressing it over time. This is going to be more of like a linear design where basically this is just do the math. You can do the math, but it's 16 total reps, 12, 10. Volume's decreasing as intensity is increasing, 80, 85, 90. And then you could do squat. And then you could test a 3RM at the end. And then that week, if that was the goal, was the squat, that's why it's earlier in the week. It's the strength day. So we're going to test that in the end. And then we're just going to deload these movements. But you could rotate the exercise. Like I said, it all depends on their goal and what they're trying to do. And then you could have a hypertrophy day where you're doing 30, 32, and then 24. This is kind of like almost like a taper in essence because the volume hits pretty high right there. But again, volume or intensity increases as volume more or less decreases. And then power, 15, 12, and then again a 15. So that's why this one dropped because this one went up. You could just think cut everything in half. So do a 2x6 at 80%, do a 2x3 at 70%, or you can cut the intensity in half. So that's just kind of an example block, 1 month, kind of just rotating and working through different movements. So this is kind of the workout structure. Like I said earlier, is like, this is not only this is the reverse order of a program where you want to start here, then work here, then work here, then work here. But because these are the easier movements and they progressively get harder in an individual workout, you flip it. So the stuff that commands the most speed, the highest level of your nervous system, that's going to be first. because as the workout goes on, you're going to get tired. So then later on, that's when then you're going to add your assistance lifts and then do your endurance at the end. So basically it's like warm up, movement prep, do some mobility work, do some stability exercises, some dynamic movements, then go outside, do your sprints, come in, do some jumps, throws, Olympic lifts, and then complement that with the strength lifts, squat, bench, deadlift, pull up, your compound movements, and then prepare those with the assistance lifts, your single leg stuff, rows, glutes, hamstrings, upper back, and then finish with your core. Any accessory exercise you want to do, or like some metabolic conditioning where if you wanted to hop on the bike and do like, a HIIT interval, like that would be at the end. So that's kind of always the template I kind of flow with. And then based on that template and now looking at it, this is kind of built out. So this is what's called concurrent. We touched on that, I think, once before. Concurrent is basically you're training everything at once in a given week. So you could think this is more speed, power, strength, hypertrophy, endurance, concurrent periodization. And then based on the day, you just rotate and pick your movements. So back squat, so this day is going to be more lower body focus. And then to give us 48 to 72 hours in between, we're just going to add our single leg day, focus day here. And then at the end of the week, we're going to do trap bar. And then we'll get our deadlift. And then that way, our two hardest lower body lifts have plenty of time so the nervous system can recover. And then you're working more just hypertrophy there. And then same's true for the upper body. You can put your shoulder press here, your incline press here, and then this is more like bench day. So you can think like squat, bench, deadlift. Day 1 squat, day 2 bench, day 3 deadlift.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah.
So you kind of mentioned if you have a client who isn't recovering well, right? So like I'm looking at like your lower, right? So if you have like your back squat and at the end of the week you have your trap bar, how would you alter their program if they had like back squat on Monday and let's just pretend the trap bar on Friday, and that Friday they're still exhausted and like unable to recover?
Yeah. So that's where depending on exactly what's not allowing them to recover, it could be the structure. So that's where like, okay, and if their goal is this, okay, well, let's move it to the front. Or by Friday, they're just tired. Okay, we're going to take out the jumps and throws, or we're just going to reduce the volume on the trap bar. And we'll just lower the volume here. And then that's now progressive overload is cut it in half and then start building back up. And then check in with them. How's your sleep? How's your protein? How's your calories? And then that way you can ensure, is it the program, that the stuff we're doing here, or is it the stuff that you're not doing here outside on your own time? But in general, yeah, so you can just remove these and stick with these. You can reduce the total volume of everything, and then just see how they recover and respond. That answer that good?
Yes, that did.
And then there's a couple things I wanted to touch on with this structure too, just kind of themes of how I program. So basically, I like to have a 2-to-1 horizontal to vertical pulling ratio for most people, unless their goal is to get really good at pull-ups for a 3-day schedule. So basically you can think horizontal row, vertical pull, or horizontal pull, horizontal, vertical. And then I like to do like one double arm day that's intended here, and then one single arm day. So it's similar in essence to this, where like you have like, your squat, your hinge, and then your single leg. This is supposed to be a little bit easier to give you that time to recover. Vertical press, horizontal press, and then incline press. But if it's somebody who has like a lot of shoulder problems, this is where maybe you just do push-ups here and landmine presses here. And then the structure for the lower body, this is what you can think as posterior chain. So posterior chain, you have hamstring, low back, glutes. So then I just kind of pick one and add one to each day. Hamstring, low back, glutes. Horizontal, vertical, horizontal. Vertical, horizontal, incline, or push-up. And then core, I like to think of like a lateral core, side plank is a good example. An anterior core, knee raises, rollouts. And then the last one being like a rotary kind of core. So you can think Palloff presses. Farmer carries are kind of a fusion of lateral and rotary. So that's a good way to just kind of break it all down. So that's what I was going to show on the template at the, maybe not. Kat, one more. So now this is another style, contrast. So just pay attention here real quick. I'll go back. So this is where we do all the power and speed stuff first. But then maybe for more of an advanced athlete or somebody who's later in their season and you want to focus more on time and you want to be efficient with your time, That's where you integrate your power with your main lifts. So you go out, you do your sprints first. Then you come in and you do your squat, immediately followed by a vertical jump or some type of loaded jump. Then you go to your shoulder press and then follow that up with a med ball throw, a slam. And then I would just do these 3 as a tricep. Go row, RDL, side plank. And that could be done in like 45 minutes. And then here, same idea. Go outside, do your sprint work, come inside, single leg, followed by a single leg jump or lateral jump, bench press with some type of toss, chin up, back extension, knee raise. And then last day velocity trap bar with some type of horizontal like broad jump, incline press with some type of med ball throw, incline row, hip thrust, farmer carry. And then that could be done, like I said, in about 45 minutes. So this is something, the structure I would use more earlier in someone's season or earlier in someone's training, where you kind of separate everything and isolate it and focus on it by itself. And then as they get more experienced with all of these, they develop the strength, the hypertrophy, all of that, and they have the skill and just the understanding of a flow of a workout. That's when you start to integrate more contrast. And then this is going to use what's called, this style here really uses post-activation potentiation is the phrase for it. Basically means when you do something heavy, the lighter thing is going to be a lot easier, especially if it's of a similar movement. So this is something I do with a lot of my athletes. I start in that last slide and then I come to this one. And that way they'll get more out of the jump because of the fact that they already activated those type 2 fibers. And then they go straight into a jump. Those type 2s are on and firing, and they're going to jump a little bit higher because of it. So that's contrast. And I think that was my last one. Yeah. Perfect timing too.
Wow.
I was gonna do a slide and like kind of show you the template. Like I just put the example exercise in, but I can I could add a slide so that way when I add everybody to it, they can see kind of like for a 3-day structure my weekly kind of templates, and then it'll be like I said, it's like horizontal, vertical, incline, and then you just pick that, and then you can expand it out into a 16-week schedule where every 4 weeks just pick a new horizontal movement, and then you have 4 months of training done like that. So that's that. So I'll work on that. I'll add that one.
Any questions,
Comments, concerns?
comments, concerns?
Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Alec. Amazing. I'm gonna disconnect this shit.
I don't know. I was well. I did try during the pandemic. I